Hello everyone, in this video we'll be continuing to build our dashboard by importing some more data, and this time we'll be using the Power Query feature. So Power Query and Power BI go hand in hand, and in our first video we imported some data that was nice and clean, tidy, needed no modifications. So in a more realistic environment, you're going to be importing data that will require modifications, and to be honest, most of your time will be spent in the Power Query window. So if you want to pick this file up, I will save it up and put a link to it in the description, and also the data that we import, I will put a link to that as well. So let's first of all import our new data set then. So at the top of Power BI, you can go to Get Data, and we'll go to Web again because all my data is online, and that's where you can access it if you're following. So copy and paste the link in the description and paste into this URL bar. Press OK. Now your data import wizard window will appear. Again, there's only one tab in this source, so we click that box. And last time we just went to load without querying, so this time we're going to be using transform data, and this will take us into Power Query. So this is the Power Query window. On the left hand side we can see previously imported data in query form. On the right hand side then we've got query settings. It'll give the query name and the applied steps. So every time we do something in the query, a new step will be created. And we have the option to click the X next to each step to delete that step. And also in some cases we have a cogwheel that we can easily edit that step as well. Bearing in mind, if you do make changes to steps earlier in the process, it can have a knock-on effect and cause later steps to break or fall over. So in this imported data set, Power BI has automatically put in some steps for us. The first one you can see is titled source, and that is basically listing or specifying where we imported the data from. Navigation is pointing to which tab of our data source we want to import. Promoted headers is where Power BI has assumed the first row in our data is our header row. And the fourth step is changing the type. So Power BI has also attempted to automatically detect what data type each field is, whether it be numeric, text, alphanumeric, or something else. Now this may or may not be correct. So you have to be very careful with formats, especially around sort of numbers and dates, but I'll probably come across issues like that later on and try and address them where possible. So as I mentioned, in this data set, our header row actually sits on row number 2, but Power BI has assumed our first row is our header row. So what I can do, as I said, you can delete a step, and I want to delete this promoted headers line because it's incorrect. So I click on the X, and it will ask me to confirm, press delete. And as I said, when you delete earlier steps, sometimes, or quite often actually, the later steps will also break. So the change type, I will just delete that step as well. So now I have my data imported. Let's say it's imported raw without any particular changes to it. Now the first 2 rows of my data contain a lot of nulls, you see, because they are irrelevant to what sort of data I want to use. So you can do things like remove columns, remove rows, and in this case, let's remove the first 2 rows. And you can do this by clicking on the button Remove Rows at the top. So if I want to remove the first 2 rows, simply click on it and remove top rows in this case, and specify how many you want to remove. So I want to remove 2 rows, enter number 2 and press OK. Now those 2 rows have been removed. The next step I can do is set my column headers. So the first row contains what I want to use for my column headers. and you'll see an option to use first row as headers, and click on that. And you'll notice each time we perform an action, a new step will be applied on the right hand side. Now, the important thing to remember is when you create a query, your original data remains intact. We're basically not changing the source data at any point. We're just modifying it for use in our dashboard. So don't panic if you think if you delete something because it won't be deleted from your source. You'll also notice when we promoted our first row as headers, Power BI put in the step again to change type, that is auto detect our field formatting. And I also want to draw attention to this little indicator at the bottom left where it says column profile based on the top 1,000 rows. So if you import a very large file, instead of analyzing the entire file, what Power Query will do is look at the top 1,000 rows, similar to SQL. So be careful if you have varying data beyond 1,000 rows. You can click on it to analyze the entire data set, but in very large data sets, this can slow down the processing. So that's why it analyzes the top 1,000 rows. So let's make a couple more simple adjustments to our data. For example, in the data we've uploaded, I know that there are 2 Richard Burtons in here. So that's an obvious mistake. So let's do something like remove duplicate entries. So under remove rows again, you'll see an option to remove duplicates. I've currently got the IMDb name ID selected, and I will remove duplicates based on that selected column. So I click on remove duplicates. There will now only be one record for Richard Burton, which is what you ideally would want. So other options available in Power Query will be things like removing columns, similar to removing rows, sorting, splitting a column. This is very similar to text to columns in Excel, and group by. So group by is very similar to creating a pivot table in Excel if you're used to that. Replacing values is quite similar to it's find and replace essentially. And then you've got combining files, so merging 2 queries together, appending queries, combining files. I'll try and cover those in a separate video. Now, if I scroll to the right, you will see at the name of each field, you'll have a little bit of an icon, for example, ABC or 123. ABC means it's formatted as a text field. If it's 123, it's formatted as numeric. And if you want to easily change these fields, you can simply click on the icon and pick one of the options in the drop down. So if I'll scroll to the right, let's have a look. So there's a mix of text and numeric fields. There was one field or 2 fields I noticed, date of birth and date of death, and you'll see what looks like a mix of numbers and dates. So if I at the top of the screen, if you see ABC123, that means it's alphanumeric. So it's a combination basically of characters and numbers. So if I wanted to change that column to a date, you can simply click on date and it will hopefully recognize those as a date format. And I will cover some problems you might encounter with dates, hopefully in another video. So date of death, let's also change that one. So I can click on that and also format that as a date. So other things we can do are to add in extra columns. So what we'll do, I'll show an example of how you can add in extra column. Now you can add in columns based on examples, similar to autofill in Excel. You can create a custom column, or you can create conditional columns based on like a little bit like an if statement in Excel, or a custom function where you literally build your own function. So in this data set, we have a number of actors who've sadly passed away. So let's create a conditional column based on the date of death. So let's say I want an indicator whether this particular person's passed away. click on Add Conditional Column. It'll ask us, do we want to give it a name? So we're creating basically a death indicator. So as individual deceased, and it builds up almost like an if statement for you. So if date of death equals null, then we can specify no, individual hasn't deceased. We'll make that assumption. And then we can add in multiple clauses if we want. In this case, we're just creating a yes, no field. So if column death does not equal null, then presumably it is populated with a death date, and presumably then we can indicate that they have deceased. So you click OK. Then our new column has been created. If I scroll down, hopefully that has worked for all individuals in this data set. Okay. So if I go back to the Home tab, you'll notice in the top left you've got this Close and Apply button. So all our changes, if we want to apply them to our imported data, we would have to click on either Apply or Close and Apply. So let's click on Close and Apply, and it will take us back to our dashboard, import our data. It will look for relationships between our already imported data, and I will cover that hopefully in the next video. That is basically how Power Query works. You'll see on the right hand side our new modified data has been imported.